Hello, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar to understand why you should pursue MA English at Ashoka. I am Pooja Kadaboina. I'm a second year student at the MA English program at Ashoka University. And joining me today are two of Ashoka's most distinguished faculty members, Professor Rita Kothari and Professor Alexander Phillips. Professor Rita Kothari is a professor of English and the director of the Masters in English program at Ashoka University. Professor earned her MPhil and her PhD in Literary Studies and Translation from Gujarat University, Ahmedabad. Her teaching interests include language politics, caste and communalism, Bollywood, Indian literature, translation studies, partition, border studies, Gujarat studies, and Sindh studies. Professor Alexander Phillips is an assistant professor of English at Ashoka University. He holds a PhD in German studies from Cornell University and a bachelor's in comparative literature and German studies from the University of California, Irvine. He was a DAAD fellow at the Humboldt University in Berlin. His research interests include eco-criticism and environmental humanities, realist literature and theories of realism, Frankfurt School and critical theory, and German literature of the 19th to the 21st century studies. Welcome, professors.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you so much. Hi, Alex.
Hello, Rita, Dr. Kothari. Thank you, Pooja, for that introduction.
That's fine.
Oh, we're gonna be less formal then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. I'm delighted to be meeting certain prospective students who are interested in Ashoka. I think the topic of today's discussion is why pursue an MA English at Ashoka. And I think those are three questions. Why pursue an MA? Why do it at Ashoka? And why do it in English, actually, right? As to why you want to do it in English as opposed to other disciplines, I'm guessing this is something that you've thought a lot about. I mean, I have remained a very, very ardent believer, almost like a faithful in the prospect of literature, in the prospect of the humanities. And I think there are the emancipatory and liberatory goals that lie in the humanities are seldom to be found elsewhere, because what humanities does is to remind us what it is to be human, what it is to be having multiple sides to truth. What does it actually mean to be ambivalent? What does it mean to be having a desire but not having the courage to express it? And between those two lies very often the story of all our songs and all our cinema. So, you know, I subscribe to the notion that literature is an extremely important institution. So if you have already decided to be a student of English, then all I want to say is you couldn't have made a better choice. Now the question is, why an MA? I mean, MA is an odd thing in some sense. It's much easier actually to kind of think that a BA, of course, one would have to do an undergrad degree. A PhD is, by then you already have the conviction that you want to go into research and a certain kind of super specialization, but the MA is somewhat in between. And which is why I think today's conversation is an important one, and we should have that. The MA may lead to a PhD if you want that to happen, or it may lead you to other kinds of prospects and careers in the media industry, communications, social media, and even teaching actually at some of the early colleges or higher schools and so forth. A lot of freelance work would be available to you. But really speaking, what is an MA degree about? I think an MA is when you actually find out as to what you want to do for the rest of your life, or at least for the next 5 to 10 years. And an MA like this, the one that Ashoka offers, is actually gives you these brilliant 2 years where you have a combination of some very fundamental courses in literary studies, and you've got a range of really, really rich electives that can sort of make you see that, okay, I'm interested in questions of, let's say, ecology of the kind that my colleague here pursues. Like I might be interested in understanding, for instance, the questions of nature or water, or waste in the context of literature. Or I might want to study certain things, whether it is in Sanskrit poetry or English poetry or Hindi literature and so on. You might want to think of what kind of avatars did Shakespeare have in the rest of the world after he was introduced by a small island once upon a time. You might want to think that how, for instance, Vishal Bhardwaj's Maqbool or Heather interprets Shakespeare. So you might want to look at that kind of adaptation studies, Shakespeare studies. Some of the best scholars are in this department. You might be a person who's interested in your Hindi or Telugu or Tamil, and you might want to study literature that's produced in your part of the world. And you may want a better contextualization of your own self and body in the light of literature that is produced here, in which case you can think of taking South Asian literature as one of your concentration areas. So really speaking, whether it is, medieval globalism or whether it is, literature from a far past in the 11th, 12th century to medieval India, to eco-criticism, to South Asian literature, to Shakespeare studies, to translation and, linguistic diversity of India, this department at the moment has, I think, the biggest sort of range and gamut of subjects that you can think of. I mean, I'm not implying that there aren't good MA programs elsewhere, there are, but perhaps the huge diversity that you see right now at the English department at Ashoka is really quite something. But more importantly, I also want to say that this is not just intellectually alive. It's also a program where we pay a lot of attention to students. I mean, if you had to ask me very honestly as to what is that one final thing that I think Ashoka is so special about, I think it is its teaching. It is unusual to have a place that has so many stars, but all of them are so committed to the idea of teaching. And that combination is also quite rare. I'll speak to you a little more later. At the moment, I'll see if my colleague Alex, Professor Alexander Phillips, wants to add something.
Yes, in general, I just underscore what Rita said, that English does not mean a canon of literature from the UK. As you heard, my own background is, of course, in German studies. In my syllabi, I routinely include texts from all kinds of traditions. In my current graduate seminar, I'm teaching a course on the representation of nature and theories of realism. Basically, why is it that the representation of nature somehow demands a kind of mode of realist representation? This is a through line that we're tracing from the 1850s all the way down to contemporary environmental thinking. And we're reading, we're reading Moby Dick next week, which I'm very excited about. But we began with a kind of obscure but consequential debate about the so-called nature fakers that happened in the United States in the 20th century. And that debate raises raises the same issues of why do we care about something called truth or facticity? What is that? How does it relate to ideas of realism? I also teach Tolstoy. I teach some Indian texts. We're reading Amitav Ghosh in that particular class. I have taught literature from Brazil. So really, it's your classroom spaces. Your classrooms will establish some really kind of dynamic dialogues between various texts and various traditions, and yes, you have the opportunity to. You will have a lot of freedom to develop your interests as you see fit, particularly, and I'll come back to this in a minute, as you move then into the thesis project, which you develop over the course of the second year.
I'll follow Alex's suit, and maybe I'll also talk about some of the courses I teach, and it might just give you some flavor. I teach a course called Dil Ka Batwara, the Cinematic Partition. And it's a course that looks at literature of the partition period, but it also comes with a premise that while it is important to understand the historical, the political, the sociological, and we do a lot of that, my own research has been in this area, about the promulgation of borders, the nation making in South Asia. But there are also very deep psychic wounds about partition. And one of the arguments the course makes is that these psychic wounds are best seen in literature and in cinema because it is not only about the making of an India and a Pakistan or Bangladesh, but it is also a certain separation of hearts. So what is an affective history of this phenomenon? And so the course, moves around the idea of literature and cinema and partition, and it's called Dil Ka Batwara. Then I teach a course on, translation in a multilingual environment. And we kind of look at not just translations, core translations, but adaptations. We look at the theory of translation in the Western world, but we also look at, for instance, how do we understand, someone trying to sing like Kishore Kumar, imitation, which is one of the highest forms of tribute in South Asian culture. How do we understand, for instance, the adaptation I was mentioning to you earlier of like Haider and Makbul? What is the history of translation from Hindi, Telugu, Tamil? Did they interact with each other by someone translating their works? How do we understand orality? What are these various versions and subversions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata that reached every part of India? Do we then say that Valmiki's Ramayana is the original and Tulsi's Ramcharitmanas is a translation? So the course kind of grapples with a lot of questions like that. Then last semester, I introduced a new course called Fictive Modernities. And it's a course that's based on the 19th century of India. And it shows that how in the heydays of colonial influence, there's a lot of background voice in my sound in my colony, I think. Are you able to hear me? Okay, I'll continue then. And it's a course that, it's pretty loud, I think. I think I'll come back again about this, yeah? You take over.
Professor, perhaps you could also go ahead and speak a little bit about the courses you've taken so far. Any courses that you'd like to highlight? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, or maybe I can. I already mentioned my Nature of Realism seminar. Maybe I should talk a little bit about the more general course offerings. Okay. So each semester you will take 3 courses. And so for 4 credits, so 4 times 3 is 12, 12 times 4 is 48. And that is what you'll need to complete the MA in English. Every semester, you will have 1 required course. In the first semester, that is a course in literary theory. Each of us, that is each of us being each member of the department, teaches 1, sometimes 2 sections of that particular course. So that will be a good introduction to pretty much the entire faculty. We have various topics on different schools of theory. So we'll think a little bit about, we'll think about like Marxism and deconstruction and psychoanalysis. We'll think about how those various theories and philosophies give us a language that might help us to gain some purchase in thinking about questions that we encounter in literary and cultural texts. So that's the first semester. The second semester, you would be taking a graduate writing seminar. And I would say that what I think is one of the real strengths of the program is the support that we give to students in taking their writing to the next level. I have to say that in my own graduate program, we had nothing like this. So I don't mind admitting I'm a little bit jealous. So the graduate writing seminar that you take in your second semester, as I said, is geared around like various writing exercises and so forth to help you advance your writing, academic or otherwise. That continues in the third and fourth semester when you take our department pro seminar. And the pro seminar is essentially a thesis writing workshop that provides a community and a structured space for you to develop your MA thesis. So if you hear the word thesis and you get a little concerned, fear not. You are not pushed into the deep end of the pool. We do give you all the structure and the support that you need to guarantee your success in the program. So in the first semester, the pro seminar is a 2-semester series. In the first semester, mostly we bring in guests who discuss their research. The goal there mostly is to look at different kinds of writing that might be in one way or another models for the thesis that you'd be doing, and back engineer it for maybe what we can use for thinking about our own writing. And then the second semester is more about you and your research and helping you to both to stick to a timetable for successful completion of the thesis, while also practicing skills of presenting original work to others and bringing it into dialogue with the work that your peers are doing. So I'll say something regarding the thesis. You have a lot of freedom with this thesis. And I am teaching the pro seminar, and we have a wide variety of projects that are being developed. You might choose to do what might be more of a bread and butter literary studies type project where you're looking at maybe a specific work or set of works from an author or a given period and developing a 25-page paper on that. But other students, we have a student doing an autoethnography. We have students doing various translations. Some students who are more artistically inclined do theses in graphic forms, and we've gotten some very interesting results from those students. Along the way, you'll be working very closely with a faculty advisor, and that person will also then give you the kind of critical support that you need to not just to develop the thesis, but the advisor-advisee relationship is one that could help you if you want to continue your education and get a further degree like a PhD after Ashoka, or any other opportunities that might open up. So. The faculty here are involved in some interesting things beyond the university itself. So who knows where that will take you?
Yeah, to kind of continue with that, like I'm trying to remember, I had a student who did an MA with us. They came from Chennai. And because I had worked on Sindhi literature and Sindhi history, the student was a Sindhi and they were very interested in that history. So they did ethnographic work, as Professor Phillips just mentioned, and they did ethnographic work in Chennai to kind of look at what were the post-partition refugee community of the Sindhis, how were they negotiating in Tamil Nadu, right? Because we usually think of partition refugees in North India, we don't think of South India at all. So it was a very interesting thesis where the student actually studied through the sight of language in the relationship between Sindhi and Tamil. There's another student who worked on, a comparative study of various Kabir translations into English. I mean, that Kabir gets translated a lot in many ways, sometimes even in audio-visual forms and songs and texts and so on. And the student kind of looks at that and asks this question, whether the usual, if you like, cliche binary of the original and the translation, whether that even makes sense in the context of Kabir, whether each translation is not reinventing the original in some, I have currently students who are working on a Hindi writer, Sara Rai, another one who's working on Krishna Sopti. So, I mean, this is just to give you an idea of the range of subjects that people can work on for their thesis. From, people can work on Bollywood, South Asian literature, or even sometimes just highly philosophical, theoretical figures. So it's just, the range is sort of quite enormous. That other course that I was mentioning to you before there's a birthday party going on where I live right now. Pooja tells me that she's able to hear me, although I can't hear myself when that's going on. But I was mentioning to you earlier this course called Fictive Modernities, which I especially designed for MA students, and I offered it last semester, and is based entirely in the 19th century. It is in the 19th century that print culture comes into existence, right? It is in the 19th century that colonial education leads to a proliferation of new forms of writing. Prose writing, novel writing for the first time happens here. And so it's a course based on the early novels of India. In almost every language, to say this is the first novel ever can be sometimes quite arguable. But the point is that the course looks at the early novel in Urdu, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, Hindi, and so on and so forth. And it looks at how the mode of fiction also becomes a site of understanding what was the project of modernity in the light of colonialism. So it's called Fictive Modernities to say whether that modernity lasted, whether it endured, whether it was articulated in a fictive manner, and also what it was doing in fiction, so to speak. So that's just, a little bit about things I do with students. Pooja, do you have any specific questions you would like us to think about and talk about?
Yes, I was hoping, Professor, and you could also sort of give us an overview of how the concentrations work in the program and how they contribute to the student study with the program.
Yeah. So you will see Pooja can show this to you later, maybe, which concentrations exist in Ashoka. There are 4 or 5 concentrations: Shakespeare studies, South Asian literature, performance studies, and so on. What do these concentrations mean, really? These are tracks, which basically means that if while doing your MA, you feel, I find myself gravitating to these kinds of courses, and if they form a certain cluster. Let's say you've taken a course with Professor Phillips and you feel like, I think I quite like this zone, and maybe I want to do more courses here, and you end up doing 2 or 3 courses in it, then you can, when you graduate, you can say, I did an MA with this as my concentration. You also have a choice of not to do any concentration, in the sense that you can just move around doing different kinds of courses, and it's a general MA degree. It does not matter at all, really. But it might, if you plan to go for your PhD and you already feel like you are in a certain zone, and who knows, you might actually end up, going into that area for your PhD, then sometimes it can be helpful when you are kind of writing a PhD proposals and stuff. But it is not a compulsory thing for you to do. Pooja, you're mute.
Yes. Also, just to enumerate, we have about 6 concentrations. So we have courses offered along the concentrations of South Asian literature, global and Indian Shakespeares, gender and sexuality studies, modern literature and culture, global medieval studies, and creative writing. Professors, I was also hoping you could talk a little bit about the space that the program holds for interdisciplinary studies and to pursue, or rather encounter any interdisciplinary any interdisciplinary interests that students might have.
Alex, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, so you do have the opportunity to take one elective outside of the department. Students take courses at the graduate level in history, environmental studies. These are some of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head that I know students have done. So that could feed back into your understanding of literature in any number of ways, and could certainly supplement your thesis.
Let me underscore something here, that you are coming to a very, very exciting university. You're not coming only to a department. Yeah. And the university has every single day a minimum of 8 events that are happening either in sociology, political science, literature, performance studies, creative writing, psychology, history, sciences, and so on. There is no way that osmosis, where so many disciplines and which have attracted some of the best people, will not impinge upon you. So even if you are doing an MA in English, the chances are that at the end of that MA, you will have enriched yourself not only by what is offered in English, but you would have, even with that, even if you don't want to, you will have been exposed to a lot of other disciplines, because some of the great speakers come and speak in various departments. You will find yourself going to those talks. If it's possible, you may end up taking a course or two. Sometimes you might have 2 departments, overlapping for certain kinds of courses. So sometimes English and media studies do. Sometimes English and creative writing do all the time. So you will find yourself in a terrain where a lot of things are happening. The question is not how much we can offer. The question is how much you would be able to handle.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that.
Your worry, really.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, Rita. I mean, I would add to that too, that Ashoka also has a number of centers devoted to specific areas of inquiry. Rita, of course, is with the Center for Translation Studies. We also have the Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality. We have a center on climate change and sustainability. These centers offer, again, all kinds of events and possibilities for getting involved, and so you would have access to their offerings as an MA student at Ashoka University.
All right, there are questions already appearing here. Pooja, what is the plan? Will you be reading them out to us and we respond? Is that the plan?
Yeah, we'll quickly go over to the Q&A session. I'll pose the questions that have come from the side of the students, and then we can answer those then.
Okay.
Just to also more or less get into the Q&A session, I also was wondering if you could talk a little bit about intellectual affairs outside the classroom, right? Things like guest lectures or seminars or conferences. What kinds of activities actively take place outside the classroom where students can then encounter these sort of discussions that they don't usually have the chance to run into inside the classroom?
Well, as I said earlier, every department holds talks, right? There are guest speakers coming to Ashoka all the time. The English department specifically has an English colloquium, which is run entirely by students with just very nominal help from faculty. And any department member who's come out with new research presents there. And sometimes you also have visitors coming from other places. At the moment, for instance, Professor Rajeshwari Sundarajan is visiting us, and she would be giving a talk. Day before yesterday, we had a talk by Professor Ganesh Devi. My new book came out, and so I gave a talk last month. So I think those, and there are also sometimes students actually work with us on our research projects. So for instance, if I'm working on a new book or I have a research project, and I would be able to spare some money from my research funds and get an MA student if I feel like this topic is something where student X or Y can actually assist me. So sometimes students also get these opportunities. And as Alex mentioned earlier, there are also these centers at Ashoka. So this is one of the students I was mentioning earlier, was an MA student. Right now, they are at one of the centers at Ashoka. In fact, there are 2 or 3 students working at various centers. Even current students are working at various centers. So the Ashoka Center for Translation, which I co-direct with my colleague, Professor Arun Vasina, who's a very well-known translator from Bangla, and also in the creative writing department, we run it together. And right now we have 2 to 3 MA students who are working with us at this center. So in terms of, I mean, basically, what does a good university do? I think the distinguishing mark of a good university is to hire people who are not only teaching and who don't need to be asked to do research at gunpoint. They will do it because they know nothing better. They will. So if you hire people who are that driven, they will establish centers, they will write books, they will write articles. And the more intellectually agile, active, engaged a faculty member is, the more benefit it has in class. I can understand sometimes when you've got, for instance, in certain universities in the world, when you've got very star celebrity faculty and they have no time for students. But this is why I began by saying that Ashoka does not do that. And I say this with huge pride and confidence in not only one or two people I know, but almost the entire university. So I think it becomes, lots of students work with faculty very closely. Do you want to add something, Alex?
Just that, I mean, beyond the kinds of offerings and centers that we have, I found that the master's students have a very good esprit de corps. So I think a lot of the, a lot of the intellectual exchange will happen with your cohort.
Yeah, that's true.
It happens in very informal ways. There's a campus daba that is quite famous for conversations over chai and so forth. So you will be coming into, you will have that just by virtue of the existence of the campus community.
Yeah. I want to add to what Alex just said. You should see our MA batches. Pooja is sitting here. They are fantastic. It's a fantastic batch and we are both quite proud of it. Not that we should take credit for it because the batch formed itself, so to speak, but you will learn actually so much from your own peers.
Thank you for that, Professor. I think you should take more credit for it, actually. So before we continue, I would request our audience to kindly type any questions that they might have in the chat box provided on your Zoom screen, and we'll then continue to address them. And also, I'd like to reassert that the applications are now open for the master's program at Ashoka University. The deadline to apply for the MA English program is the 31st March 2023. And so now we continue with the Q&A session. Professor, I think I'll address a question that's just come in about writing and reading in Indian languages and regional languages, and how that can be pursued in terms of courses, and as well as in terms of your thesis, how might an Indian language feature in, and what can you do about it?
What an excellent question. So your ultimate thesis will have to be in English because not everybody will be able to read Telugu or Bangla and so forth, right? For instance, if you are doing it in Hindi, I would be able to read it. If you do it in Sindhi, I would be able to read it. In Marathi, I would be able. But how will I know all the languages? And how will anyone know all the languages? So in that sense, the ultimate thesis will have to be in English. But that being said, the interaction between your I don't want to say regional language because there's certain connotation of those being provincial, but I want to say that the interaction between Bhasha and English is very important to some of us, right? And this Center for Translation works with this all the time. So all the students that I mentioned to you earlier, they are all working with an Indian language and English. If English is not an Indian language. But so even though the thesis in English, the intellectual, affective inputs, even the theorization, you can mine the Indian language for it. And you can talk to your supervisor and say, okay, what is the best way for me to do this? If you are thinking in an Indian language and I want to translate your thesis then into English, that's perfectly fine. If you want to do that conversation with your supervisor and say, मैं इस तरह सोच रहा हूँ, मुझे इस चीज पे काम करना है, and तो कर लो, खुशी से कर लो. This is not an anglicized department. It is an English department, but its aim is to be not just respectful of different vernaculars. And once again, vernacular is a term that I'm not comfortable with, but its aim is not only to respect the bhashas, its aim is to actually see itself as a department of literature, not of English literature. So yes, please, if you are thinking that way, then you should absolutely apply. You should apply for me.
Yeah, and regarding projects like this, Professor, are there any facilities that support writing in Indian languages and pursuing that study?
I don't know about, I mean, what bigger facility would you need than people who write in those languages? So, I mean, if you are, let's say, working with Bangla, I can think of so many Bangla scholars who will be able to help you. If you are working with Tamil, we can get you to speak to somebody who works with Tamil literature and so on. But beyond that, I don't know what is meant by facilities, right?
Yeah. Just to sort of go back to the structure of the program again, are there any, essentially what can students do in their summer months, right? Are there any opportunities for studies abroad? Are there any global tie-ups for the program that students can avail? Or if students come into opportunities like this for summer study outside the institution, what kind of space can be held for that by the program?
I think a lot of these initiatives are driven by students themselves. So time and again, students themselves have said that I've applied for such and such internship, or I've applied for such and such fellowship. I do know of MA students who have gone abroad. The department cannot ensure that everybody would get a chance necessarily, but whenever a chance appears and the department makes sure to share it with the entire MA batch, and whoever applies, the department sort of tries to be as supportive as possible. But these are not things we can say with guarantee. As I said, a lot of students have ended up sometimes working with some professor or the other, which can also count for a summer internship, right? So I think these are all very individual efforts. But if you want to add something, Pooja, as a student yourself, you feel free to do that.
Yeah, I think in terms of study abroad, of course, there's quite a lot of effort on the part of the students themselves. And I think there's space to be able to go and do that and have that factor into your pursuit of the program here. And I think specifically regarding internships, there's actually much space. We have the Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality, which sort of takes on the role of circulating information regarding summer internships across the department. And we have internships to do with being research assistants for professors within the program who are working on active projects during the summer months, who take on research interns. So you have research internships that come along your way. And with regard to the center's work, you have internships where you can work with nonprofit organizations as well. And personally, there's also space for internships in publishing. Of course, that's not something that's facilitated by the department. Again, these are all opportunities that are curated largely by students' efforts and then supported by the faculty and the program here. So there's a lot that you can go ahead and do in publishing as well. And I think there's enough time with the summer break where you can go ahead and get a good amount of experience in these fields and then come back to the classroom with them. I think to move on, with regard to concentrations, once again, I think someone would like to ask if how these concentrations work, particularly to do with the fact that do they have to pick them at the beginning while applying for the program? Can that change? And how does a concentration add to what you will pick to be your thesis towards the end?
Okay, just to say very boldly, there is no have to about any of this. If, as I said earlier, if you end up gravitating to a bunch of courses that seem to fall under a concentration, you have already done a concentration, so to speak. Yes, if you don't want to do it, nobody's asking you to make an announcement. If at the time of taking your degree, you feel, oh, I've already done 3 courses on, global medievalism or performance studies, and I would like the Office of Administration to give me a certificate, or the department to give me some document that says I've had this concentration, we'll make sure that you do that. But if you don't need to announce to us any of that.
I think regarding students who come in to apply for the program, I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit about prospective students who aren't immediately coming in to pursue an MA program. Say they've had a gap where they've pursued a corporate life, or they've gone on and pursued other interests. How does that work out for them then in coming in and applying for the MA program?
Alex, do you want to take that?
Yeah. The short answer is that should not be an obstacle as such. We have students who have done that. We also have students who have come to the MA from different fields. And so for them, the master's is a transition, moving then into a field of more humanistic inquiry from, sometimes from STEM fields, that sort of thing. And so, it could also, that kind of work experience could also be a very interesting asset. I would think that working in journalism or media could, a student with that background could definitely enrich the classroom. As far as, once you're admitted, the program is structured in a way that it gets you to where you need to be, bottom line.
Yeah. I think coming back to your interests personally as well, could you talk a little bit more about any projects that you're pursuing at the moment? And also perhaps talk about whether there's any students helping you out with research to do for this project as well.
This question is meant for who?
Either of you, of course, or to be more accurate, both of you, I'd say.
Okay. God, so many actually. I'm trying to think where I have an MA student, one MA student who's actually helping me, an ex-MA student who's helping me with a course. I see a question here, someone saying, do you teach Bankim Chandra, Rabindranath Tagore, R.K. Narayan? Yes, at least I do. I offer an Indian literature course, which is at a much junior level. You're not required to take it, but should you be interested, you can always audit or sit in the class or whatever. Because the idea is that some of that, I'd be familiar with. So even designing a curriculum is actually an act of research, right? So I've had students helping me design a curriculum. I have a student right now helping me on a paper that I have, there's an anthology of Indian literatures for which I'm writing a paper. It's a paper on partition, but partition has been done to death. And the question that I'm looking at in that paper, which I'm trying to formulate, is that we tend to think of the Hindu-Muslim as this inter-religious, inter-ethnic conflict. But what is the role of caste in that relationship? In the sense that there are ideologies of pollution came to bear upon this relationship. And yet that's not we tend to separate caste and communalism, but really speaking, both intertwine in the context of hegemonic Hinduism. And I'm working on that paper, and there is a student an MA student who's helping me. I'm pursuing a certain project of women translators, a history of women translators, and there is an MA student who's helping. So, I think I find a treasure actually in the MA community. It is, this shouldn't be quoted anywhere else, but it is my favorite community actually. Mm-hmm. Alex?
Yeah, so at the moment, I do not have a research assistant. I have in the past who has helped me with some of the legwork of various research projects. That having been said, Ashoka University is a research institution. And what that means is that there is a unity then of research and teaching. And one of the joys for me of working at the institution is precisely the fact that both aspects of my own job description go hand in glove. Oftentimes, I build units around things that I am working on in my research, not necessarily just about the specific 3 or 4 authors that I spend a lot of time thinking and writing about, but also some of the broader topics in a way that's actually very helpful because I'm bringing in other materials in ways that might not necessarily fit within the parameters of a research project, right? But one of the joys of that model is that oftentimes I have found that something that I've done in the classroom has affected my writing in a very positive way. So, for instance, I mentioned earlier that I taught this unit on the American nature fakers debate, so-called, within the context of my course on ecology and realism. And I knew about it. To tell you the truth, I designed that unit without having really spent much time with these authors. I had only a cursory knowledge. And then the conversation I had with the students, I thought, I know how I'm going to conclude my monograph. And I went home and I wrote the last piece of my book project based off of that discussion in class. I have a forthcoming essay on the aesthetics of atmosphere that came directly out of a unit that I taught in a course on climate fiction. And so that's, of course, is what it does, what it does for me, but then you have the opportunity to pursue a research project too. So hopefully the seminars that you take will also then be generative in terms of giving ideas or pointing in directions that will help you to make your own contribution to an ongoing scholarly discourse in whatever field.
Thank you. I think there's one question that I'd like to address, which is the fact that the program doesn't have any reservations. So I think we have students applying from various backgrounds, and then I was wondering how. I think one of them were wondering how a representation or reservation for DBAs might work out in the program as well.
So you're quite right. Ashoka does not have an affirmative action or a reservation policy. But what Ashoka does is each time we select a batch, we go through the batch very carefully to see that we have, for lack of resources, and which includes not only financial resources, but also includes resources such as a certain fluency in English language, a certain kind of, for want of a better word, pedigree, school, whatever, that no student who's desirous, who's keen, and where we see a certain kind of spark and hunger to join the program, we take a careful look at it. So our policy is not driven by a quota, but it is certainly driven by a commitment to diversity and a commitment to making sure that there is a range of students. Whether we always succeed in it or not, I think we used to be less successful than we are now. The overall, I'm not talking only about the MA, I'm saying the overall demographic of Ashoka University has been changing a little slowly than I would have liked. But nonetheless, you will, given the nature of scholarships that are offered and so forth, we have been able to make a more heterogeneous batch than people actually imagine. So what I would suggest is that people apply and also write to us, right?
Yeah, I think a little bit more on what the department looks at in terms of prospective students and their work and applications. Could you talk a little bit more about what could be looked at in terms of, say, for their on-spot essay, in terms of their critical thinking and writing? What might you be expecting or looking for while going through these?
So this is the thing, that an on-the-spot essay, sometimes you could write an analytical response to it. Some people could write a creative response to it. The point is not that there are these 3-4 things that we necessarily look for. If a topic has been given to you on the spot. So, for instance, I see a question, someone saying, what are some of the on-the-spot? I can't even remember right now what are some of on-the-spot questions, but let's just say if we were throwing a question at you and asking you that sometimes a book may have caused a revolution, then a movement, yeah? Or can a book be a movement? Something general. which is really a larger thought about how do you actually think what books are about, right? Now, if someone in that response ends up giving example that this is what happened, in this society, in that culture. I mean, why do totalitarian states ban a book? If books are so useless and irrelevant, why do they actually make people worry so much? Because we know that they can be threatening, right? In the sense that they can release new ideas, and anything that releases new ideas, whether it is a film or a book, can become threatening in times of fascism. So someone can cite a few examples, but even someone else may not cite many examples and may stay with one, but manages to articulate that well within the given words. That's perfectly fine. So we don't carry these very standard expectations. At that moment, when you are responding, imagine yourself speaking to us. Now, if you are speaking to us, you will use a certain register of language. So use the same register of language. It does not have to descend into a very, very colloquial, slangy language, but please see it as a conversation with us. So take a look at your on-the-spot essay, whatever it is. It's not very long. And say, okay, what are the thoughts that come to my mind as I write this? Don't worry about 5 marks on analysis and 5 on method and 5 on the act of writing. It doesn't work that way. We look for a certain spark. We look for a thinking mind.
Yeah, and I think this will be my last question today for the session as well. Could we talk a little more about the career prospects for MA students after they move out of this program? What kind of placements come along that students with this program can avail? And what have students in the program previously gone on to do or are pursuing right now?
Well, this is an extremely relevant question. I also think, considering that you will have a webinar with students themselves, it might be a good idea to talk to them, right? Because they will know where their seniors have gone, what kinds of things they are doing, what are some of the things they are doing or they will go on to do. So I think it is kind of best handled at that time.
Definitely, definitely. And I think just to give a general overview of that question so that you can attend the next webinar and know from students themselves, we have students who've gone on to pursue teaching at schools. We've got students who've gone on to pursue their PhD programs abroad. We also have students working in the publishing field. So I think it provides actually a large expanse of opportunities that you can go into, and you have interests that you can mold towards various career prospects, really. Yeah. So I think we'll end with that for today. Thank you so much, Professor, for taking the time and joining us. And I'd also like to thank our audience, and I hope that this discussion has been helpful in your process for the application for the program. Thank you. Thank you very much for a wonderful evening.
Yeah. Pooja, thank you so much. You've done a great job.
Thank everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. There's also a feedback form that if you'd like to fill out, please fill out as well. It'll help us helping you out.